It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. My guest today is Mike Plaia, Chairman and CEO of PharmaPoint. Mike is a proven hands-on leader and senior executive with over 20 years of leadership and business experience in small, medium, and large companies. He's responsible for the overall performance of PharmaPoint, an innovative technology-enabled pharmacy management and software company focused on medication optimization and outpatient retail pharmacy management for hospitals, health systems, and physician groups. Prior to PharmaPoint, Mike served as a founder and chief operating officer of Source Medical, the largest nationwide provider and leading source of information technology solutions and other critical services for ambulatory surgery centers, specialty hospitals, and rehab clinics. Mike also co-founded Industrialplex and served as executive vice president of business development. There he focused on providing a full range of commercial equipment systems, maintenance, and professional services to national retail, food service, and industrial customers in the U.S., Canada, Middle East, and Asia. Following his graduation at West Point and his military service, Mike got his business career start at General Electric, working on the corporate audit staff and oversaw such initiatives as acquisition integrations, Six Sigma implementations, financial audits, and controllership assessments. He now lives in Birmingham, Alabama, where he was raised. Mike Plaia, welcome into the corner office.
Brad, I appreciate you having me.
Great to have you here. And we had a chance to chat a few weeks ago, and I'm sure lots been happening in your life. Certainly a lot of weather. What part of the country we catch you in today? Are you still experiencing winter as spring sprung?
It seems to be a little bit of both. I'm
A little bit
based
of
in
both.
Birmingham, Alabama. Yeah, so it's been cold, but cold is relative in Birmingham compared to many places. So I'm not
Indeed.
complaining.
Lovely place. I've got a couple of clients there. I've been there many times, and it's a great part of the country to be. Well, let's start about your early story. We always like to kick it off where you grew up and what your early family life was like. Give us a little outline what those days were like back then.
No, absolutely. As I mentioned, I'm in Birmingham now, but I was also born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. So it was I would say, a pretty normal upbringing. Had a loving family, great mother and father. I've got two brothers, an older brother and a younger brother. And of course, those are the days when I was coming up that there was not cell phones and there was not Life 360 where you knew your parents knew where you were all the time. So it was a great upbringing of go outside and play and be home before it's dark.
What kind of work did Dad do and Mom?
My father worked in the database as far as the old school IT world. So he spent a career doing that at Liberty National Life Insurance and at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama. And my mother was, for the most part, a stay-at-home mom, but she did do a lot of work on the side to help provide for the family. So it was a great family unit. We did all the things that you would imagine, taking the summer trips to the beach and spent a lot of time on the ball fields. That's where a lot of our early days were.
I love it. Wait, so what kind of balls did you play? Pretty much everything, baseball, football?
I did. I played predominantly football and baseball since I
Yeah,
was 5 years old and dabbled in a few other things like basketball here and there. But
sure.
those two were my love, football and baseball.
The other ones kept you in shape between the seasons, I guess.
just just something to keep me occupied, right? Keep me out of trouble.
What about early influences? Particular things you remember from mom and dad that stuck out in those early years?
Well, like I mentioned, my parents they were always there for us, and there was never a doubt that we came first, which I guess would be an early leadership lesson. But a
Yeah,
lot of my influences, I mentioned being on the ball field. I
yeah,
spent a lot of time out there, and if you're blessed at times to have youth coaches and high school coaches and others that spend a lot of time and invest their time and energy. And I can remember it like it's yesterday. I mean, Coach
yeah.
Brizendine, Coach Littleton, Coach Jones, Coach McFarland, all the youth league coaches that really had an early influence all the way through the grade school elementary years of having great teachers.
What were some of the things you remembered, Mike, that they poured into you back then?
Well, from a coaching standpoint, I think making sure that your effort is there, your attitude is there, and everybody's blessed with different amount of ability. But as we
Yeah.
know, as we get older, we learn that your ability is kind of what you're gifted with, but your attitude will really determine how well you can do something. So just those constant messages, but making it fun. So being able to learn to compete and do those type of things and learn who you associate with matters a lot,
Mhm.
even as a kid, because the influences on your life as you're developing are so impactful.
Yeah, yeah. Were you a good student in school?
I was. I always had the mindset, and I guess that's part of being a competitor is you want to do great at whatever you do. So I always
Mm.
made school a priority, and that's something that my parents had imparted on me that academics come first. So I knew that if I was not excelling in school, then I was not going to get to participate in athletics. So they knew how to motivate me. But it always did. And you train the brain just like you train the body, right? And at
Sure.
some point in time, athletics will go away, and you've got to make things happen intellectually. So I always enjoyed school as well.
Other things other than school you're involved with? Any other extracurricular activities? School government, music, theater?
I did some school government, more in the middle school area.
Right.
I went to a Catholic. I actually went to a public school as I was growing up in elementary, and moved in seventh grade to a Catholic school the
Mm.
first year it opened. So I went from maybe
Wow.
250 kids in a grade to I think we had 16. So that was quite a different swing. And of course, when you have 16 and you want to run for student council, for example, it's there's not a whole lot of competition. But I did a little. But when I got to high school, between athletics and the academic workload that I had, I didn't have a whole lot of time to do much more than that.
Right. Any entrepreneurial things as a kid? The paper route or mowing lawns or anything like that?
Brand, I don't know if I would call it entrepreneurial. I mostly made some extra money when I had with the limited spare time I had. So
Yeah.
I would cut grass, do odd jobs here and there. I did some, even in high school, I, worked with a law firm sometimes as a runner, just little things that I could squeeze in. I don't know, again, if I'd call it necessarily entrepreneurial, but it was a way to make some extra cash to have a
Wow.
little bit of fun and do it, keep my other obligations intact.
How'd you have fun with that pocket money? What kind of things did you do,
Well, if my kids weren't going to listen to this, I'd probably tell you, but I don't
Mike? You
I
wouldn't
don't
want
think I
them.
would. No, it was obviously when you're in high school and you've got good friends, and we hung out a lot and wanted to do a lot of things on our own. And
Yeah.
my parents worked really hard, and I always felt like it was not necessarily their job to provide fun for me. So we found ways to have fun and do those things. But yeah, it's I was, like I said, normal high school debauchery, I would say.
That's a good way to describe it. Well, you went off to West Point, and that's a wonderful accomplishment. Thank you so much for your years of service. I want to talk about that a little bit. But what made you decide to apply there?
Brent, I was blessed to go through the recruiting with football and baseball. So I had some success in high school with football and baseball. So I was getting a lot of interest. Actually think the first letter I got from West Point, I don't even think I opened. I wasn't really sure what West Point was. I did not
Right.
come from a military family, did
Yeah.
not have anybody that really spoke about the military much, but I was very realistic about my future in athletics post college.
Mm.
I wanted to make sure that I had a very solid foundation for success outside of athletics. So as I went through that process, I really narrowed it down to where I thought academically provided me the most upside. So I looked at the Naval Academy, I looked at
Mm.
West Point, and I looked at Vanderbilt. Those were really the three schools that were recruiting me that were going to allow me to play both football and baseball. But I felt like really set me up for success beyond college. But
Yeah.
something about West Point just grabbed me. I will tell you, as an 18-year-old kid, it was probably the worst recruiting visit I took as it relates to athletics. It's just um, there's not a lot going on right up at West Point. It's got a different focus, different mission, but something about the place when you're there
Mm.
just captivates you. It's
Yeah.
it's one of those areas, it's a development program, premier leadership institution, and it really just represented the best of the best, and I
Mm.
just wanted to be a part of that, and it
Yeah.
just grabbed a hold of me when I visited it, and it became a goal to finish there.
That's great. And did you play both baseball and football there?
I did. I went there as a quarterback and a shortstop,
Wow.
and played quarterback my freshman year. But then I got moved to linebacker. So may
Mm.
tell you either how fast I was or how bad my arm was, one of the, one or the other. But once I transformed from a quarterback body to a linebacker body, the baseball coach ended up moving me to third base. So I went
Mm.
from shortstop to third. But I had a blast. I enjoyed both sports quite a bit. Made some great friends, guys that are that I call brothers to this day. My kids call
Yeah.
them uncles.
Yeah.
The military in West Point is one area where you create great bonds, and then you add a locker room on top of that, and it's even a deeper bond. So,
Right.
uh, great friends, great relationships that I made there.
That's awesome. And then 4 or 5 years of service after that. What happened immediately after West Point?
I went I went into the field artillery,
Yeah.
but actually my very first job in the Army was a graduate assistant baseball coach at West Point. So
Ah, really?
I
Yeah.
stayed on as the graduate assistant coach and spent some time doing that, which I've always had a passion and maintain a
Right.
passion for coaching today. But I
Right.
went on into the field artillery and went to airborne school, went to uh, the Paladin Commander course, which is part of the new artillery system that was coming out at that time, and
Yeah.
then spent some time at Fort Hood, Texas.
Yeah. And any active duty at all during that period of time? Like,
I was never deployed. I
oh boy.
did my stint at Fort Hood, and I tell you, it was one of the tough decisions I made to get out of the Army. I
Yeah.
absolutely loved the Army. To me, it was the epitome of being able to lead and the camaraderie that you have with the soldiers, and it's a lot like an athletic team. At the end of the day,
Yeah.
you train
Right.
together and you're training for competition. So I really enjoyed it. I don't think there's a more honorable profession
Mm.
than the armed services for what they're asked to do. So I really enjoyed it, and I just felt at that time as if I had to make a decision: was this going to be my career? And if it
Yeah.
was not going to be my career, was I best served by getting started in another endeavor? It was what I ended up doing. It's one of the hardest discussions I ever had. I had a lot of
Yeah.
respect for my battery commander, who was a captain at the time, that was always trying to develop me, and
Right.
having to go in and tell him that I had decided to get out of the military was one of the hardest discussions I had. Matter of fact, the first time I walked in, before I could say anything, he said, "Hey, let me show you this. I've put this binder together for you. These are all the things that you're going to need as your commander." And I took the binder, said, "Thank you." I walked back out. So I had to
You,
find a
right.
way to come back in and have the conversation with him because, he was a great leader for me. And
Yeah.
as great leaders do, I didn't want to let him down. And I felt like I was letting him down, but I knew I had to make that decision that I felt was in the best interest of myself at that point in time.
What tipped the scale for you, man? What made you decide to go into private, you know, life or private corporation rather than staying in
I
business?
will tell you that probably, in the early 20s, probably a lot of it was naivety, meaning,
Mm,
20 years sounds like a lifetime when you're
yeah.
in your early
Sure.
20s. And I felt like, well, 20 years, my life's, it's passed me by. And the reality of it is not. I've got a lot of great friends that had great careers, and they retired and they started into a new endeavor. And
Right.
just at that point in time, and I think God has a path for us all. And so I don't ever look back. I don't ever question decisions at that point in time. But that's really what was going through my head at that point in time: is this where I'm going to spend my life?
Right. Right. What was that first job you took when you left the army?
I took a job with GE. And
Yeah. Great
it's
company.
interesting. During that point in time, I was
Would have been
taking
during the
some.
Jack Welch years, right? In the late
It
90s.
was during the Welch years. And I will tell you, Brent, I was I know I've used the word blessed a lot, but it's how I feel when I look back over time. I probably got to spend my time in three of the best leadership institutions that exist. I mean, going
Mm,
from West Point, which is your premier leadership institution as a university, if you will, a college, to the U.S. Army, which
right.
is a leadership development program in itself, to GE at that time, which under Jack Welch had really had a distinct focus on
Right.
developing leaders.
Yeah.
And I really was not even looking to get into corporate America so early. I was actually going to go back and get an MBA, and they had a career conference for junior military officers. I went to it. I interviewed for some jobs to see what was out there. And at that point in time, Jack Welch was having JMOs, junior military officers, come into a leadership program, which was an element called the corporate audit staff, which is where
Mm,
GE was taking a lot of their up and coming leaders, their top 10% of different programs, and they were allowing junior military officers to join. And I ended up taking that opportunity. It was 100% travel. It was going to a different GE business 4 months at a time. So you're
wow.
learning a whole different business. And it was intense. I mean, it was long hours, a lot of days, 6 days a week, really just driving hard, living in hotels. But you learn so much by jumping into the fire. And it's one of those, I would probably say, in my whole career, one of the biggest times that I had to really overcome self-doubt and
Mm,
learn that self doubt can be your enemy, right? With
right.
confidence, you become confident through preparation, and I think confidence is one of the key leadership attributes to have. But walking into a program that folks said that were very good, very smart, have been in business for a while. And I didn't quite really understand anything about the business world other than classes I took in college.
Right.
And it was, I think, the first I left. I was crawling in the mud, and 2 weeks later, I'm at GE, and they did a quick training assessment program. I got sent to Waukesha, Wisconsin, on a team with GE Medical, who had just accomplished an acquisition, completed an acquisition. So our job was to do an acquisition integration, and my manager at the time had kind of divided the team up, and he said, "Hey, Plaia, go to Nashville, this company service business we just bought, work with their CFO, break down their P&L, break down their, 5 years of the balance sheet, look for any variances, any trends." And this is like a foreign language to me. So,
Wow. Yeah.
my response was, I got it. I got on a plane. I I landed in Nashville. I drove to the bookstore. I bought some books on finance, and I had my questions written down. I went and met with the CFO, and I finally just said, "Why don't you give me all the information, and I'll come back to you if I have any questions." So, but I was able to kind of overcome that just really through hard work. I just said, "I'm going to learn this. I'm going to figure it out." So it forced me to learn a lot of different aspects of business over that period of time. So there was not a better opportunity for me to transition from the military into corporate America than that role at that company at that time.
Yeah, you talked about leadership in those three organizations, West Point, of course, the military, and then GE. What would you say is kind of the common thread of all three that you felt, kind of got reinforced over those first few years of your service and your work?
Well, I I took the initiative early on to keep a journal, and I would always
Mm,
keep a journal on the leaders I had, and I was in a great scenario where I had multiple leaders over multiple time periods. So I would keep a journal on what this person did that motivated me, that inspired me, and I would also keep a journal on the type of things that this person may have done that disabled me, right? That
yeah,
did not
right.
motivate me, that did not inspire me, and I kept that for some time. And it's interesting how you can take good and bad from every leader.
That's
Doesn't
right.
make them a bad leader, doesn't make them a good leader. Just there's different attributes that you look at consistency. The thing that I saw that I thought was one of the most important was how quickly you would understand whether that leader cared for you above themselves or did they care for themselves above you, right?
Mm,
Did they serve their team first? And I believe the highest calling for what we are put on this earth is to serve our fellow man. And I think that's
yeah,
very true for leaders. And it's
mm,
transparent. The people following you will see that right away, whether it's in corporate America, whether it's coaching an athletic team, whatever that may be. If you can serve them, and I saw a saying years ago that said, if serving is beneath you, then leadership is beyond you. And I believe that because it's
that's right.
it's just it's transparent, and I saw it in the military. It's
Mm,
officers that ate before their soldiers ate, or officers that waited until all the soldiers ate, and then they ate. And that in
mm,
itself, without a single word being said, sends a message to those people, to those soldiers you're trying to lead, that you
right,
are first, I am second. And I think
right.
that carries a lot more weight. At least it has for me over the years.
Interesting. Did you see that at GE as well?
I did, and it was very interesting. GE was a little bit the environment that I was in at that time, like I said, was a lot of up and comer leaders that were very smart, and it was very competitive. It was, and for me, where it was a little bit different, where they had an advantage in the business world and their knowledge and their experience and what they knew, I had an advantage on leadership because many of
Yeah.
these folks had not ever led. So they were trying to understand. So where I had self doubt on the knowledge component, there was a lot where they had self doubt on the leadership piece.
Leadership, yeah.
So there was things that I would see that I could quickly pick up on. And not that they would ask me for my advice, but I would
Right.
see the things that they were stumbling on that I was privileged enough to learn a lot earlier in
Yeah.
time. So and a lot of that is, I'll give you an example of leading from the front. It's another
Mm,
core leadership trait I believe in. Don't ask people to do things that you're not willing to do yourself. So, when you have leaders that are demanding a lot from you, but they're not willing to spend that same time and effort, it sends a message. And so, making sure that they know you care, making sure that you lead from the front, making sure that you stay positive. It's
right.
hard. Life is tough. Life is tough. It throws adversity at you all the time, whether it's on the personal front or on the business front, but you still control that mentality. It's an inside out decision that I'm going to stay positive. And if you can
Right.
do that, it's contagious to your team. If you're
Right.
always negative as a leader because of whatever's going on around you, it's contagious as well to your team. So maintaining that positive, leading from the front and making sure that they understand that you are putting them in front of you, that in itself enables you to go a lot further with that team than you would be in any other scenario.
So true. So true. Well, after a couple of years at GE, you pretty much pursued entrepreneurial activities after that. You've had a number of successful startups since then. What was kind of the inspiration for that for you to? kind of move out of the corporate world and go, explore some paths on your own?
It's I love to say that it was originally my idea, but it wasn't. My first entrepreneurial opportunity, a gentleman by the name of Jason Grease that I worked with at GE. He was on that corporate audit staff. He was actually my
Mm.
first manager at
Right.
that GE medical endeavor, and extremely smart man, just very very smart. And he had called me. He had moved on from the corporate audit staff. I think he was at NBC, working with corporate mergers and acquisitions, doing some things to that degree. And it was around, if you remember the late 1990s, if you will, when we had the big internet bubble that was
Oh,
going on. And he had called me one day. They were doing acquisitions, and they were paying a lot of money for things that really had a lot of eyeballs, but not necessarily a lot of profit. And he had some ideas and asked me if I wanted to partner with him. And at that point in time, I was single and I didn't really have a whole lot of responsibility. And I just said it sounds great.
you late 20s at the time or early 30s, Mike? What time?
I would say yeah, mid to late 20s.
The late 20s, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay.
we had launched a company in Atlanta that was really focused on the back end automation of the supply chain, which
Mhm.
sounds very elementary today, but at that point in time, it really wasn't. It was looking at electronic purchase orders,
Mm.
electronic remittent orders. We even did reverse auctions on the supply chain. We did some Six Sigma quality training and a lot of the different things to really get a company launched. And we had some big clients. We had Home Depot
Wow.
and GE Power, and so we had a lot of success. And that's really where I got that bug, if you will,
Yeah.
of
Right.
we can build something. And one of the engagements we had was in healthcare. So the next vision for a business plan was written with that concept in mind of healthcare. And looking at healthcare at that point in time was the patient the patients were moving very much more into the outpatient setting,
Mm.
outpatient physical therapy, outpatient radiology, ambulatory surgery centers. It was really moving out of the hospital, but a lot of the healthcare IT landscape was still focused on the hospital setting. It was very fragmented,
Right.
very mom and popish in the outpatient setting. And barring what Jack Welch used to always preach at GE, he said, "Be number one or number two in a market, or don't play in that market."
Right.
So the original business plan said we're going to own each of these outpatient spaces in the healthcare IT space and software. So raised some capital and made a couple of acquisitions, and I actually went back and tried to hire some folks out of GE because I knew they were very well trained.
Right.
And
Right.
we grew that to probably 6,000 or so clinics. So it was
Wow.
a great endeavor. Still always opportunities to learn. I've always tried to maintain a growth mindset that is one of the things West Point taught me. West Point forces you out of your comfort zone, right?
Right.
You're never in a comfort zone. So, but you also start to realize that nothing great ever happens in your comfort zone. So if you want to be an entrepreneur, you've got to get used to that because you're never in your comfort zone. You're always in a
Right.
growth mindset and learning. So that's really what enabled me to move on from there was what did I do right? What did I do wrong? What can I grow in? And I learned a lot there. We raised a lot of money, but um, I learned a lot about managing a board. I was very young. I learned a lot about how the capital structure works with private equity coming in. So it was a lot of great lessons learned there too. But that company eventually exited and was sold to Avery Partners.
And who was that? Which company was that? Where's the name?
Source Medical.
Source Medical. Right. Got it.
Yeah, so I jumped ahead on you, but it kind of flows
Yeah.
together that they kept me on that entrepreneur sprint, if you will. But that brought me back to Birmingham, by the way, just
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
come full circle. I was in Atlanta, moved and started this company in Birmingham, and it was around that time before I moved is where I had met my future, my now wife, I should say, but back then would have been my future wife. But that brought me back to Birmingham.
Right. Cool. Now tell us about PharmaPoint. How did that evolve? I know you've been doing this for about 12 years or so now, and founded the company, or was that a company that you purchased?
Somewhat of a combination, if you will. I had when I left Source Medical, I did my own what I would call private equity type investing. I got into media. Bought some TV stations with some different partners I'd worked with. I did some real estate development, but I
Mhm.
always focused on healthcare because I'd gotten to be very fond of healthcare and I felt like I understood that landscape. And I'd made an investment in a company in California that I had moved to Birmingham and put a leadership team over that company. And that company at that time focused on what would be more of physician dispensing. So
Mm.
that's enabling a physician to dispense medications, generic medications directly from their office. And I felt like that made a lot of sense at the time. But as I tracked and I was on the board of that company, it really wasn't growing much, and it's a heavy, high volume, low margin game. So it looked like it was a challenging growth model. But what was enticing is I looked at healthcare moving towards value-based care, looking more at how
Mm.
do we drive outcomes for these patients, and realizing that 90 plus percent of the time we treat patients with prescription medication. It's the largest therapeutic treatment for any disease state. That pharmacy needed to be in that care continuum to drive those outcomes, but the dispensing model wasn't quite it. So
Mm.
came up with a new model that was actually now creating the entire pharmacy at the point of care. So
Mm.
hence the name PharmaPoint, pharmacy at the point of care. I rebranded it, created a new name, put a new leadership team in place, and stepped in as CEO. And we took it from there and just took it in a different direction. And that
Mm.
was really the birth of PharmaPoint. Hired the right personnel, the right leadership team that understood pharmacy, and we took it from there. And we focused on physician clinics to start with. So in that model, we don't expect physicians, don't expect hospitals or health systems to really understand retail. That's what we do. So we would
Mm.
actually create, build, manage, staff that retail pharmacy that's owned by that provider.
Right. Right. Well, it's really kind of a servant leadership approach too, isn't it? In terms of what
It really is. I mean, at the end of the day, it's how do we get patients better and
right.
how do we enable the
Serving better.
provider to treat patients
Yeah.
and get them on their treatment plan. And we learned it a lot. You hear about lack of adherence, for example, patients not getting their medications, not staying on their medications. And to me, a lot of that is education, right? It's usually a conscious decision that someone's not taking their medication. Either they can't afford it,
Right.
it gives bad side effects, whatever that may be. And I think that's exacerbated over the years because retail pharmacy has been disjointed from the care continuum. It used to
Right.
be you would write a prescription and you didn't really know as a provider, did my patient get their medicine or did they not? There was
Right.
no way to really know. So
Yeah.
you didn't know if they were getting better or not getting better. So that's what caused a lot of the wasted cost in healthcare, patients going back to the doctor, getting
Mm.
readmitted back to the hospital. And it's simply not that the provider didn't diagnose the patient and put them on the right treatment plan. It's the patient didn't necessarily follow through on the
Right.
treatment plan
Right. It's more
uh,
difficult for it.
for,
Yeah.
for whatever reason.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. And how many employees today, Mike?
We're sitting at about 65
Yeah.
employees.
Yeah.
We're across the United States. Work with a lot of health systems, and a lot of these employees, will staff the pharmacy. So, if we have a pharmacy, let's say in Chicago, where we have pharmacies, that's our pharmacist that runs the pharmacy. It's
Yeah.
our technicians. It's our staff that we manage, which I will tell you has been a very interesting dynamic because we have 65 or so employees, but we also have another 75 or so folks that we manage, meaning we take over pharmacies for health systems and hospitals as well, and so we manage those employees of the current health system. So we're managing them; they're just not our employees.
Right.
Now the challenge it gets to, which has been a unique challenge for me, I've always felt like I've seen about as many different leadership scenarios as possible. But the challenge is we have professionals that are running pharmacies. It's not as if I can do a culture call, for example, say, hey, at 12 o'clock on Wednesday, let's get everybody on the phone and because they're treating patients.
Yeah.
And you're also not going to ask them to spend time after work to get on a call. So it's made it an interesting dynamic on how you build unity and build a really good defined culture that can enable success when you are mostly remote and mostly not able to get everybody in the same place at once.
Well, you're setting me up for my next question, Mike. How do you do it? Because, if your focus really is on care and your people are always caring for, your clients, your customers, how do you build out that culture?
It's a great question, and one that I spend a lot of time, historically thinking through, because I believe to have a great culture, everyone must have a commitment to a common shared purpose.
Yeah.
And you've also got to have shared values and shared behaviors and a shared mindset. And so to get everybody in that on that same page becomes a challenge. And so, instead of doing things like routine uh, company calls, and we still do that for those that we can get on the phone, and we'll still do some of those culture building, but we developed a mantra around execution that we
Mm,
wanted to push out across the board, because we felt like we had a great vision, we were in the right space, we had a lot of health systems, a lot of clients that needed our service. It was really about how well can we execute. And so, instead of just having a PowerPoint to throw up, what we actually did was created a a mantra called CODA, which is talks about accountability. So know it, own it, deliver it, and answer for it. And
mm,
each of those have different definitions to it. But the question was, how do we get that to really take hold in the company? So we had a competition. So we had
mm,
different pharmacies, different parts of the organization, and to come together, and they were tasked with creating a mascot for CODA, a
mm,
mascot for that execution accountability mantra, which got them all talking about it, right?
mm,
So we put a bonus for the team that won. We got a bonus. So they're working towards that bonus. They're getting creative. And we saw some great things. We had some great different um, mascots, if you will, that came forward. But what it actually did was had them talking about it amongst themselves. So instead of having a 30-minute, 1 hour
yeah.
call, we had them talking about it amongst themselves. And we had a big event. I had what I call, I don't know if we call them celebrity judges or not, but some friends of mine I know that have had success, whether it's in professional sports, whether it was in Hollywood, some different places that came on and listened and watched the presentations. I went into another room, they voted on it, we gave a winner, and then we built a branding marketing campaign
Mm,
around that coda, which ended up being four superhero type shadows, if you will, that had a K and an O and a D and an A on it with the
right.
capes flying and our colors. So now we have mouse pads, we have coffee cups, we have everything that's tied to that that gets shipped out. So, but the biggest thing to get the culture to take place was
Yes.
going through something a little bit different than just a normal call. It was having this competition that
Yeah.
really got them talking about it amongst themselves.
And they owned it too.
And they owned it. And
Yeah.
that's the key. I mean, you can't be accountable for something unless you know it, right?
Right.
And know about it. So that's, part of that is teaching leadership to our senior leaders on making sure your people know what they're accountable for,
Yeah.
but also making sure you own it. I use an example on ownership all the time. When I had a development company and a construction company that worked with it, for some reason, Brand, I had a rental car for a year. I didn't. I had a car that I didn't buy a new car. I just had a rental car. But the question I asked our entire employee base was, "How many times do you think I washed that car? How many times do you think I changed the oil?" I didn't, because I didn't own it.
Right.
Right. So there's a difference when you feel ownership for something that
True.
you really take accountability. So you've got to make sure your team knows what they're accountable for, and then make sure they own it when they are. And that's just, again, gets back to execution.
Yeah. That's great. Great point. Mike, what do you look for when you're making bets on the people you invest in and hire?
You know, I look a lot for referrals. For that's one area. You can't always have that, obviously, but if I have people I trust, because I think trust is one of the biggest words that's not used enough in building a strong team. Right?
Mm,
If your team trusts you and trust each other and you trust them, so I trust what what the people I have working for me have to say about other people. So I look for that a lot. But the other, I tell you, I'm not even though we're in pharmacy and there's some levels of expertise we have to have, meaning I can't put somebody that's not a pharmacist in as a pharmacist, right? So there's certain
Right.
backgrounds you have to
Yeah.
have. But when
Sure.
you look at the regular kind of corporate jobs, I look more for the grit of
Mm,
that person. I look more for their attitude. I can teach them the industry. I can
right.
teach them these different roles, but it's do you work towards results or do you punch a clock? Or do you
Mm,
come in and
mm,
work 8 to 5 and you're ready to go home? Or do you really work towards results? And there's a different mindset when you get people working towards results versus just showing up and punching a clock. And I think when you're small, this is what's fun about being an entrepreneur. You get to go through every stage of a company. When you're small, you wear all these different hats. You really never accomplish everything you want to accomplish in a day
mm,
because you have a list of stuff you want to proactively do. And then you have stuff that hits you during the day that you're very reactive to,
yeah.
right? Because you wear so many different hats. And as you scale the company, you get to start taking hats off. And leaders in your company get to start taking hats off. But the opportunity it also gives every employee is this company is either going to grow under you or it's going to grow around you.
Mm,
And that's your decision.
yeah.
And what really differentiates whether it grows under you is your attitude and your grit towards, am I going to execute consistently with a positive attitude and get the results, or am I going to come to work, show up, do what I can do during the day, wait till it hits 5 o'clock
Mm,
and leave?
yeah.
And it's harder to manage that as a company grows in size, right? Because people
Mm,
can hide sometimes when it
yeah.
gets bigger, and not everybody's made the same. And I realize that. That's a lesson. One of the biggest lessons I had to learn in leadership is everybody's a little bit different. They have different backgrounds, they have different beliefs, they have different goals, they have different things that incentivize them, and you've kind of got to figure out what that is because they're not all going to operate like you operate.
That's right. That's right. Do you have a favorite interview question or an interview scenario that kind of helps you get to that in terms of determining about others?
A lot of times I'll ask the question, and do you work on a schedule or do you work for results?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if someone hasn't really thought through that question before, their immediate response is usually will tell you what they're thinking. And
Yeah.
the other that I often use is getting more around self-awareness, right? Understanding, do they have a growth mindset, right?
Mm,
Or they have a fixed mindset and they're content with where they are? Are they willing to learn? Are they willing to fail, so that they can learn? So a lot of times asking around self-awareness, like what are some of the things that challenge you? What are some of the things you need to work on? And some people actually have an answer to that and some don't. So I really like the ones that actually have an answer to that. A lot of people are afraid to answer that question because they
mm,
think that it's showing them in a bad light. In reality, it's showing that you're very self-aware
right.
of what you need to work on, which means you will get better at that.
Yeah. Great. Well, Mike, you've been very generous with your time, but we always have one last question we ask all our CEO guests, and that's what kind of career or life advice would you give someone who maybe has their eyes on a corner office or maybe wants to be an entrepreneur like you someday?
If you're going to be an entrepreneur, I would I would say be prepared to fail, and
Right. Right.
and that's not a bad thing. And
Yeah.
I don't mean, a lot of people may hear that and say, well, that's a bad thing. Failure is not a bad thing. You don't grow unless you fail. You don't, if you've never failed, you've never tried. You've never taken a chance. You're going to run into challenges. You're going to face a lot of adversity. It's never going to go exactly like you think it's going to go. I've seen more presentations. I get to sit on both sides, right? I'm an entrepreneur, but at the same time, I've also made investments. I get to sit on both sides, and I always laugh when you see this initial business plan and these initial growth charts based on, let's say a percentage of the market. And I say it's never going to be perfect, right? You got to be prepared to turn the wheel. You got to be prepared to adapt to the what you face. You've got to be able to handle adversity because if you can't overcome adversity, no one will ever know who you are.
That's right.
I mean, they just won't because it's the ones that can tackle adversity and keep moving forward and keep moving forward. And those that hit adversity and stop, are the ones that are challenged. And that goes back to execution, because I think there's a lot of great ideas. I think people have had great ideas for a long time. The key is, do you execute them? There's a lot of great ideas that have stuck on the sideline
Yep.
because the first challenge someone hit or faced, they stopped. Just keep turning the wheel. I've had investors ask me on my own company, can you give me a 5-year plan? And if I'm exactly in 5 years where I tell you I am now, you should fire me,
Yeah.
because I didn't adjust to the marketplace to give you a 5-year plan. Things change so fast now, and the ability to adapt to that and respond to adversity. Look, we started out in PharmaPoint. Like I said, it started out as a dispensing company, turned into a pharmacy point of care, and now we have technology and software, which is taking the forefront. So we've become more of a software company than we have anything. So it's moving to what the market gives you. But if you're an entrepreneur, write your plan, listen to the marketplace, hire great people around you,
Yep.
but you got to be prepared to wake up thinking about this and go to bed thinking about this, because it is a challenging endeavor, and not many people are successful at it. So you got to have a great vision and a great idea, but the execution part of it is what's most important. And I would say, if you don't go that route and you want to get to the CEO chair, learn to lead, outwork everybody. I'm still a big believer in outworking those. That doesn't mean not have a balance in life. That was a lesson, again, I had to learn myself. Have a balance, but be prepared to work and work hard. And nothing comes easy. No one's entitled to anything. No one's entitled because I've been here 20 years, I get that job
Mhm.
next. There's no such thing as a participation paycheck. You still have to earn a paycheck every day,
Right.
right? So it's fighting those different mentalities. But at the end of the day, hard work seems to outweigh everything.
Great counsel. And Michael Plaia, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer at PharmaPoint, thank you so very much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
Brant, my pleasure. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.